As a result of fluoridation, our children will be healthier and happier.
There is no health hazard that justifies postponing water fluoridation.
You're not dealing with a benign substance.
There's much too much risk for too little benefit.
Fluoride is safe.
They decided far too early, before the science was properly in, that fluoridation was a good thing.
The dental community has no idea of the toxicology behind fluoride.
Fluoride does not just affect the teeth.
Fluoride is a neurotoxin.
This is being drank by so many people throughout the U.S. every day.
But who's responsible? Who's the doctor making sure we're not getting too much?
The weight of evidence actually is more in favor of fluoride doing damage than against.
This is against all principles of modern pharmacology. It's really obsolete.
Water fluoridation is the practice of adding fluoride compounds to the public water supplies for the purpose of reducing tooth decay. The policy, which began in the United States in the 1940s, has been hailed by the Oral Health Division of the United States Centers for Disease Control as one of the top 10 public health achievements of the 20th century. However, a growing body of science indicates that fluoridation is neither safe nor effective. In this video, we examine why over 2,000 health, scientific, medical, dental, and environmental professionals are calling for an end to fluoridation worldwide.
Water fluoridation is the dispensing of a drug.
This is a way of delivering a medicine.
Fluoride is a drug, is a medicine.
Fluoride is being put in specifically to alter you physically, to make a physical change in you.
This is not chlorine. This is not any number of the other chemicals that are used to treat the water, make the water safe and drinkable.
It's not like chlorine used to make the water supply safe and kill the bugs in the water supply.
This is the only thing anywhere in the world that gets added to the municipal drinking waters to actually treat the human, to treat the body.
There is absolutely no drug on the market that's given in a one-dose-fits-all situation.
It's absolutely obsolete. It's in modern pharmacology, it's so clear that even if you have a fixed dose of a drug, the individuals respond very differently to one and the same dose. Now in this case, you have it in the water and people are drinking different amounts of water, so you have huge variations in the consumption.
You can have an athlete, a laborer, who are drinking many, many times the amount of water. You can have someone who's diabetic, who's drinking a ton of water compared to the average.
I mean, the whole name of the game in pharmacology is to deliver the right dose to the right person at the right time. And that's not what fluoridation does. It can't do it.
I would prefer an individual use approach. I would have no problem with a doctor or dentist prescribing fluoride for a patient that he was keeping in touch with and monitoring for possible side effects and for the efficacy of the drug. That's essentially what's done with any other drug, and that's the way it should be done for fluoride. We don't put other things in the water to try to keep everybody's blood pressure down or everybody's stroke risk down, and there's no reason why we should be trying a one-size-fits-all approach for this either.
The problem with adding medicine to water is an obvious one of consent, that people can't give their informed consent, which is a basic of medical ethics.
We're allowing communities to do to everybody in the community what an individual doctor cannot do to an individual patient, and that is prescribe medication regardless of the informed consent of the patient.
What physician that you know in his right mind would treat somebody whose medical history he doesn't know, who he's never met, with a substance that's meant to do change in their bodies, and just with the advice, have as much or as little of it as you like, but you'll take it for a lifetime because it's meant to help somebody else's teeth?
Voters medicate each other whether they want it or not. And if 51% of the voters say, we're going to medicate everybody in town, and they all get medicated.
Fluoride is not an essential element.
There's not a bodily requirement for fluoride.
Fluoride is not an essential nutrient, certainly as far as the UK goes. You look it up in the books to see what our Department of Health says, and they say that no essential use has been found for fluoride in the human body. So it is not in the category of a vitamin, and apart from anything, it's miles more toxic than any other vitamins.
Whatever benefit there is from fluoride on teeth is topical rather than systemic.
It's been shown that it's really a topical effect principally rather than a systemic effect.
It's effective topically, not when it's swallowed.
There's no reason for people be exposing themselves, all their internal organs, to fluoride when, if it works, you can do something topically.
If you want to prevent sunburn, you don't drink suntan lotion, you put it on your skin. And so if you want to have the benefits of fluoride in oral health, what you do is put it on the surface of the tooth and not drink it.
The quality of evidence for topical fluoride is in a different league from the evidence on water fluoridation. I mean, absolutely no question about that.
Adding fluoride to toothpaste, you are going to ingest some of it, and that needs to be taken seriously. But it's not made to be ingested, and it's made to be rubbed onto the surface of the tooth, which is where you're supposed to have it. It's a much smarter way to go about using fluoride in dentistry.
It's widely accepted that the topical application of fluoride to the surface of teeth is beneficial. I have no dispute with that. However, I can see absolutely no justification for asking the whole population to take it systemically, to swallow it, internalize it for that benefit, because it's available in toothpastes, it's available in dental treatments at the dentist. So I don't think you can justify the fluoridation of drinking water on the lines of a topical treatment to teeth. It's illogical.
One of the recommendations I've made is because we now know that it doesn't need to be swallowed, that the public has to be informed. Again, informed consent. They should be told that it doesn't work by swallowing it.
One of the things that the proponents are very careful to stay away from is to mention how many people don't fluoridate.
Most of the Western world does not fluoridate their water. We are definitely in the minority in the fact that we push water fluoridation.
Many of the countries in the world, the developed countries, no longer fluoridate, never did fluoridate.
Most European countries do not fluoridate. Austria, Belgium, the Netherlands, France, Germany, Sweden, Norway, Denmark, Iceland, Italy, Greece, Portugal. The overwhelming number of countries in the world do not fluoridate, and guess what? Their teeth are just as good, if not better, than ours.
One of the most striking things, I suppose, was to look at trends in tooth decay over time in various countries.
The comparisons between fluoridated countries like America and unfluoridated ones like most of Europe, and indeed most of the world, are very interesting.
If you look at the World Health Organization database for 12-year-olds, that tooth decay has been coming down as rapidly in these non-fluoridated European countries as it's been coming down in the United States and other fluoridated communities.
Areas that don't fluoridate have seen the same decrease in tooth decay that we have seen over the same time span.
If you ask someone to pick out the lines, the decline lines, which are in countries where water is fluoridated, from those in countries where it isn't fluoridated, actually you can't pick them out. So I found that very surprising against the background of, as I say, having been a default fluoridationist.
What you really need to look at and what matters at the end is what's your total body load.
Children are getting a lot of fluoride from a lot of different sources.
We've had a tremendous increase in fluoride from many sources. Water is one source. When we drink that water, when it's made into soda pop or it's made in beverages and made into soups, made into other products, we get fluoride from that source also.
And we also have a lot of pesticides that have come on the market that leave fluoride residues on fruits and vegetables.
Fluoride is a very common component in pesticides. And so, if you drink a glass of grape juice, that's a non-organic grape juice and it's got skins on it, you're going to get a very high level of fluoride just from your grape juice.
And they're also getting it from toothpaste. Studies have shown that you swallow quite a bit of toothpaste, or the children swallow quite a bit of toothpaste. Even if they're told not to swallow it, it just happens by accident. They don't rinse as well as adults, and sometimes they don't have as good swallowing actions. And therefore they're getting a lot of fluoride from that.
So who's monitoring this exposure of when are we getting too much? No one's monitoring that. Nobody's looking at the total exposure to ensure that we're not getting too much and that certain subgroups aren't getting too much.
The reality is we need to reduce our fluoride intake.
In 2005, the Center for Disease Control admitted that 32% of our children in the United States, including children in non-fluoridated areas, have dental fluorosis.
About a third of the children in this country have some form of dental fluorosis, meaning that they had too much fluoride exposure during their early childhood.
Dental fluorosis is damage to the tooth because of too much fluoride exposure. We swallowed too much fluoride and it shows up as white spots, brown spots on the teeth.
You see these white spots or splotches or lines. In more severe fluorosis, you actually see the surface layer flaking off. You see brown spots.
And in severe cases, there's actual chipping and pitting and erosion of the tooth.
Dental fluorosis is a biomarker that your child has been overexposed to fluoride during the development of their teeth.
We now believe that there are several mechanisms involved. Fluoride could be inhibiting the enzymes, the serine proteinases that are degrading the final traces of proteins that are left behind in the teeth.
The mechanisms have something to do with interference with the enamel-forming proteins or inhibition of some enzymes during that critical period.
To do that, impacting those the enamel cells in the teeth means that it can also impact cells elsewhere in the body.
The promoters have always had this faith that you could damage the growing tooth enamel, the enzymes, the G proteins, or however that happens, without damaging any other tissue in the body at the same time. And I think that's very unlikely.
Not only is it an effect on teeth, what's happening in the teeth is very likely happening in the bone as well, because we have the similar kind of structure of hydroxyapatite mineral structure in the bone and the tooth.
Your teeth are sort of a window into the bone, a window into your skeleton.
So if there's this adverse effects going on in the teeth, there are very likely to be adverse effects going on in the bone.
It's a sign of toxicity. It is not just to be dismissed as merely a cosmetic effect.
This whole debate has been captured for over 50 years by the dental lobby, by dentists whose preoccupation is teeth. Well, teeth are not the only issue in the body.
As dentists, we diagnose pathology of the mouth, diseases of the mouth. And we tend to disregard or not involve ourselves with the diseases of the rest of the body because it's not within our purview, it's not within our license to diagnose other parts of the body.
Most definitely, the dental community has had a monopoly, if you will, on the study of fluoride. And they have absolutely used tunnel vision to look at fluoride as a dental concern. However, it is not just a dental concern. It's a toxicity concern.
The National Research Council has a report that just came out in 2006, which is one of the best sources of finding out what fluoride is doing to the rest of the body.
One of the most interesting things in the report is the diversity of the number of organs that are being affected by the fluoride beyond either the teeth or the bones.
We do need to get away from looking only at fluoride in connection with teeth. We need to be considering its effect on a whole bunch of other systems in the body, on people's general health in a whole lot of respects.
I think the ADA's recent statement on warning against adding fluoridated water to baby formula is a watershed decision.
The American Dental Association has finally done what it should have done years ago, and that is to tell parents not to use fluoridated tap water to make up formula.
The American Dental Association recommends that we not have fluoridated water be used for making infant formula or for infants to drink.
One of the messages which I think is extraordinary in this whole issue is that the level of fluoride in mother's milk is so extremely low. It's 0.004 parts per million, which is 250 times less than we put in the drinking water.
There have been a couple men who have said, well, maybe mother's milk is flawed, but most scientists don't go that route. They say mother's milk seems to be the best we have, the best we know of, and if it's low in fluoride, maybe that's what we should have for infants, is low fluoride.
Nature has devised a system for keeping fluoride away from the infant, and we're circumventing that by putting fluoride into drinking water. And I think there are consequences.
I think parents should know that fluoride is an extremely active chemical when it gets into our body. It can interfere with the pineal gland. It can interfere with the thyroid gland. The thyroid gland and the pineal gland are both intimately involved with brain development, mental development.
A real concern with young kids, especially with newborn infants, is that the blood-brain barrier is not fully developed at that point. And when children are drinking a formula made with fluoridated drinking water, they're getting a huge an inappropriate dose of fluoride in the developing brain. This may be part of the reason, for instance, of the depression of IQ that we've seen in these Chinese studies.
You do not want to create a fluoride exposure during a period of brain vulnerability.
All of these things are indicators, serious indicators, that you shouldn't expose young babies to fluoride. And of course, that's exactly what happens when you put fluoride in the water.
How are low-income kids supposed to, or low-income families, supposed to avoid giving their kids fluoridated water?
They can't afford to avoid it. They can't afford to seek sources of drinking water that has no fluoride in it.
I think that the low-income communities could be at higher risk for adverse effects from fluoride exposure or from water fluoridation.
As far as I can see, there is no doubt that the intake of fluoridated water is going to interrupt basic functions of nerve cells in the brain.
The NRC committee did review the available information on fluoride effects on the brain, on neurological function, and we concluded that there does seem to be evidence for some effects. There needs to be more study of several areas. There certainly seem to be effects on the developing brain, but there may also be effects on the brain in older individuals as well.
The research on the brain since our study was published has absolutely confirmed what we predicted and what we reported in 1995.
There are now 30 animal studies which indicate that fluoride could damage the brain. And this comes on top of a number of studies from China which indicates that fluoride lowers IQ in children.
I mean, there's lots of epidemiological evidence now that, for example, it might affect the intelligence of the child coming out of China, and that's been reviewed by the National Academy of Sciences. They say that you can't be absolutely certain about it, but there's quite a strong indication, and we need further research.
In my view, fluoride today, as far as intelligence and the brain is concerned, is where lead was in the early 70s. In the early 70s, scientists knew that high levels of lead could cause brain damage in children and other health effects, but they felt that subclinical levels of lead were okay. I think the same thing is happening now with fluoride, that it's only a function of getting more and more sensitive tests to show that even lower levels of fluoride can cause lowering of IQ and other subtle effects.
You know, while these bits of further research are going on to elucidate what the absolute truth is, we should be taking a more precautionary stance and saying, okay, for the time being, we don't fluoridate.
concern about fluoride and the effect on the thyroid is multifold.
Fluoride was used to suppress hyperactive thyroid, especially in Europe back in the 40s and 50s. And the doses that were used to suppress thyroid activity are now in the range that people are getting in the U.S. from this vast overexposure to fluoride.
There's a consistent body of literature that indicates that fluoride exposure does reduce thyroid function in humans and in experimental animals, and that the exposures in humans associated with these effects are in the range of exposures that are expected with people who drink fluoridated water.
A large percentage of the population of the United States does have some problem with the thyroid gland.
The large number of people who have hypothyroid, underactive thyroid now, may very well be related to the fact that there's so much fluoride in the environment.
The ingestion of fluoride does affect the actions of the thyroid gland.
A hypothyroid individual should definitely be concerned about drinking fluoridated water because it would take a very serious clinical condition and it could make it even worse.
The effects of hypothyroidism, even probably borderline hypothyroidism, are things like depression, lethargy. When a person just doesn't feel like getting up and doing anything, there are obviously a lot of things that can cause that, but low thyroid function is among them, and low thyroid function is a contributor to depression in some, perhaps many people.
We have several studies, as a matter of fact, in the United States that have shown that fluoride can increase bone fracture rates.
Peer-reviewed studies in prestigious journals such as the Journal of the American Medical Association that's showing increased risk of bone fracture based on the amount of fluoride that a person consumes. And consuming it in the level that people get from drinking fluoridated drinking water.
We do know from animal studies that the strength of the bone actually starts to decline the more fluoride you have in the bone. The fluoride makes the bone more brittle.
Sufficient accumulation of fluoride in the bones seems to make them weaker. It makes them more dense on X-ray film, but this is associated with a more brittle structure.
Of course, we're concerned about hip fractures because that's a huge cost to the healthcare system.
Hip fracture in the elderly, in all too many cases, means that that person is not going to walk again or will even die.
It's well known in the endemic fluorosis areas that the first sign of skeletal fluorosis is aching joints.
The early stages of skeletal fluorosis are associated with bone and joint pain.
Fluoride causes symptoms identical to arthritis.
You cannot distinguish the fluorosis or early fluoride poisoning from rheumatoid or osteoarthritis. It's very much the same.
Nobody, to my knowledge, has yet looked carefully at fluoridated cities or fluoridated populations and looked at the symptoms of arthritis to determine whether or not fluoride is contributing to this endemic or possibly epidemic of arthritis that we have in North America.
I think there's every reason to be concerned that today fluoride is one of the factors contributing to the epidemic of arthritis in this country. According to the CDC, 1 in 3 American adults have some form of arthritis. That's 68 million Americans.
Supposedly the fluoride exposures in this country are not usually high enough to get to skeletal fluorosis, but again, that's an area that really has not been studied well. I think it's likely, it's not a given, but I think it's likely that a lot of early stage skeletal fluorosis does show up as bone and joint pain, but it's never recognized as being skeletal fluorosis.
If I was an arthritic individual, I would be eliminating every possible source of fluoride exposure that I could think of.
If you ask most dentists and ask them what they're putting in the water, most dentists would say sodium fluoride, pharmaceutical sodium fluoride, the same stuff that is in toothpaste.
They have absolutely no idea that it's, in 9 out of 10 cases, hydrofluorosilicic acid. and that hydrofluorosilicic acid is a waste product for the phosphate industry.
This has come about because for maybe 100 years, the phosphate fertilizer industry put out two very, very poisonous gases into the environment, hydrogen fluoride and silicon tetrafluoride. Eventually, they were required to capture those, and they did it with a wet spray, water, and that water converts these two very toxic gases into hexafluorosilicic acid. And it's this scrubbing liquor, which is about 25% strong, is put into tanker trucks, driven around the country, and added to our drinking water.
If this stuff goes out the stack, it's an air pollutant. If it goes directly into the water supply, if they take that scrubber liquor and dump it into the local river, it's a water pollutant. But if they put it into a tank wagon and sell it to somebody, a water authority, like magic, it's not a pollutant. And they can take that then to your drinking water supply and not discharge it into your river. They just charge it directly into your drinking water supply, slowly bleed it in, and as magic, it's no longer a toxic pollutant. It's now what's called a product.
It's never purified. It's not a pharmaceutical grade compound. It's a mixture of whatever that collects in the stack gases. And it contains lots of contaminants, a lot of heavy metals.
When you're talking about adding fluoride to drinking water, you're not just talking about adding fluoridation chemicals. You're talking about adding all of the industrial waste byproducts that come along with it. In Oregon, where we've got 135 communities that already exceed the drinking water standards for arsenic, the idea of adding any more arsenic to drinking water, even if it's a small amount, just doesn't make a lot of sense. I find very few people who actually, with an open mind, read through the science, understand the significance of the questions and what the direction that all the new science is pointing in terms of the risks of fluoride, who still go on to say we ought to force it into everybody's drinking water.
We have better ways of improving dental health today than using fluoridation. And let's be sensible about it.
It doesn't work systemically. It works topically.
It is unethical. It is unnecessary. It's ineffective. It's dangerous.
I mean, this is so obvious. It's so really very, very far-fetched. You have the teeth there, they are available for you. Why drink the stuff?
Hello, I'm Dr. Bill Osmundson. I'm a general and cosmetic dentist and have been a dentist for 30 years. Before that, I received a master's in public health in nutrition and health education. For the first 25 years of practice, I promoted water fluoridation aggressively. I thought I saw the benefits. It wasn't until I actually looked at the information myself and sat down and looked at the different government agencies and the different reports and the studies that I began to realize that fluoridation was a problem. One of the first things I did is I looked at my tube of toothpaste. It says drug facts. I know it's a drug. If I were to give it to you, it'd have to be a prescription. That's for swallowing. When it comes to toothpaste, it also says don't swallow. And if you do swallow, contact a poison control center. Well, the amount of fluoride that they're talking about is a pea-sized amount of fluoride. You probably don't see that in advertisements, a pea-sized amount of fluorides. Usually when I see an advertisement, it looks more like a Dairy Queen ice cream cone. That amount is 1/4 milligram of fluoride. Well, that's the same amount of fluoride as what we find in 8 ounces of water. 1/4 milligram of fluoride, 1/4 milligram of fluoride. Don't swallow. If you do, call the Poison Control Center. One of the things that concerns me is water fluoridation for infants. The American Dental Association and Center for Disease Control recommend that infants not receive water for drinking nor for making their formula. It's 250 times more concentrated in fluoride than mother's milk. We shouldn't fluoridate water and harm our most vulnerable. The next thing I looked at was dental fluorosis. These are the white and brown spots on the teeth. The only thing that causes dental fluorosis is fluoride. Too much fluoride ingested, usually during the developing years, birth to about 8 years of age. When I see people coming in to have treatment for dental fluorosis, I mention to them that they have had too much fluoride. And this is an indication that the rest of their body has probably had too much fluoride also, their bones and in the rest of their organs. Damage from dental fluorosis is not disputed. Everyone agrees that too much fluoride can cause dental fluorosis. About 1/3 of children are now experiencing fluorosis, according to the CDC. The next thing I wanted to look at was benefits. What are the benefits of it? I've heard reports of 20 to 40%, 60%, 80% tooth reduction with water fluoridation. So what is the benefit of water fluoridation? And I had a close look at several factors. One, comparing different countries of the world, we can see that no matter what we do on fluoridation, whether the country fluoridates or no fluoride at all, decay is reduced the same amount in all countries. We can compare states in the United States. And we can see on a graph that as they're plotted in order of increased amount of fluoridation in the state, fluoridation doesn't make any difference. We have the same amount of good health in the states regardless of their fluoridation. Same thing for counties and other locations. That was disturbing to me. If there's no benefit, well, why are we fluoridating? I have 2 requests for you. One is to talk to your dentist and your healthcare provider about fluoridation. Ask them if they've seen the National Academy of Science report on fluoridation. Give them information that they may not have on water fluoridation and excess fluoride exposure. That helped me when my patients casually, calmly, quietly said, have a look at this. This doctor, this dentist is concerned about water fluoridation. What do you think? None of us professionals want to harm our patients. Our whole lives are given to improving the health of people, not harming them. And so for those of you who are healthcare professionals, I'd highly urge you to look once again at the science on fluoridation. Science doesn't need to be scary, it's just information. Spend a little bit of time looking at it on both sides of the issues. Don't just look at one side filtered. Look at both sides and weigh it for yourself. The other thing is to sign an online petition with me at fluoridealert.org. The online petition requests Congress to have hearings on fluoridation. It also recommends that we no longer fluoridate our water. Thank you.
You know, I had always believed that water fluoridation was a good thing. I mean, I had spent a lot of time in a dental chair as a kid, not from cavities, but from seemingly every other oral surgery you could imagine. And, you know, growing up, it was just from a, you know, I took science classes. I had a BS in ecology and a BA in environmental science in college. And, you know, everything I had heard about and my exposure was that water fluoridation was a good thing. I can't say I read any scientific studies about it. I didn't really know the details, but I certainly knew that overwhelmingly the medical community and the dental community thought water fluoridation was a good thing. I remember debating some other environmental studies majors in college over the benefits of fluoridation. And, you know, to me, it was really a social justice thing. It was like for low-income kids who didn't have access to good dental care, it seemed like it made sense. When I first got asked by a client, when I was an environmental attorney, I had a client ask me to look at what would the environmental effects of fluoride be on salmon if a community on the Columbia River decided to fluoridate their drinking water? And, you know, my first joke was, well, I know what the effects would be. It would probably give the salmon much better teeth. And, you know, after actually making it clear to my client I wasn't interested, my client just said, hey, look, take a look into it. If you don't find anything, then we leave it alone. And what it really just took was one phone call to a fish biologist who said, don't worry about the arsenic, don't worry about the other heavy metals, some of the other toxics on the Columbia. The only toxic that's ever been proven to actually slow down and just about stop a salmon run on the Columbia River was fluoride. And at that point, it was really a wake-up call. I said, you gotta be kidding. And what I proceeded to learn, and it was really my entry into finally getting into the science, understanding what was the current state of science on this, was simply looking at the effects of fluoride on fish. And what I learned very quickly is that at about 1/4 of the concentration that we put fluoride at in drinking water, you can significantly affect salmon migration. They notice it being added to the water, and they'll actively avoid swimming into an area that has as low as 0.21 parts per million of fluoride. To me, it was an eye-opener. It was basically a pretty good sign that I didn't know a lot about fluoride other than the kind of common, what I would say, myths, which were that it was great for poor kids' teeth, that there weren't any adverse effects, and that anybody who raised concerns about fluoride was just a quack or somebody who didn't have science on their side. And I had to reevaluate a lot of things, and in the process I was just shocked at what I found. The new science that has come out about the impacts of fluoride and water fluoridation specifically in just the last several years, it exceeds almost anything. I mean, I work with toxics all day long, and we constantly have new information coming out about different emerging contaminants and endocrine disruptors and things like that. But in terms of the significance of what we've been finding, few things rival the new information that we found out about fluoride. Having the National Academy of Science come out and do a report that lays out the potential connections between water fluoridation, everything from Alzheimer's, increased risk of certain cancers, to impacts on neurological health of kids. That science is very compelling. For most people, when they learn that even the American Dental Association now warns against using fluoridated water to mix infant formula for kids, that's surprising to them. When you learn that the source of fluoride is coming out of, is a waste byproduct of phosphate fertilizer plants, that is a red flag to most people who care about clean water. I think that's a way to break through with people. I mean, I know it has. When we started with the Oregon legislature, talking to basically the medical professionals within the Oregon legislature and giving them this information, by the time they had reviewed it and considered it, we had the only doctor in the Oregon Senate, the only nurse in the Oregon Senate, and the only dentist in the Oregon legislature all opposed to the water fluoridation bill. And it was based on just the science. I find very few people who actually, with an open mind, read through the science, understand the significance of the questions and what the direction that all the new science is pointing in terms of the risks of fluoride, who still go on to say we ought to force it into everybody's drinking water. Even for people who think that fluoride needs to be a part of some dental protection strategy, that there are other ways to deliver that outside the drinking water system.
Certainly people with kidney disease should be very concerned about drinking fluoridated water because it does put them at a higher risk for a number of problems, from bone problems to teeth problems if they're children to some of the endocrine and other problems. People with kidney problems are at higher risk of effects from fluoride for two major reasons. One is that many of them will have a higher water intake, so the actual exposure is higher. At least as important is the fact that most of these people have reduced clearance or elimination of fluoride from the body, so they're going to accumulate it faster, they're going to have higher levels in their blood, they're more likely to see adverse effects of fluoride than people with normal elimination.
The problems posed a fluoride toxicity for individuals with kidney disease is a major concern, one that I do not understand why in the United States that we haven't been looking into this issue much more strenuously years ago.
We know from studies done in this country that at 2 parts per million, people with kidney disease have bone damage at 2 parts per million. But there's never been a systematic study to see what 1 part per million fluoridated water does to people with kidney disease.
It's very disturbing that in the United States that there have been no systematic studies whatsoever on the increased susceptibility that is almost certain to occur in individuals with kidney disease with respect to fluoride toxicity.
If you go back to the 60s, scientists were recommending that studies be done to examine the effect of fluoride on people with kidney disease. But after 40 years, those studies have not been done.
The impacts that I would be concerned about of excess fluoride intake, such as in water fluoridation, for a kidney patient is the impact, for example, on their bone health. You would have increased accumulations of fluoride, and you would create conditions of osteoporosis. It could be aggravating several bone diseases. But also, you also can have a greater impact on other areas of the body, even neurological function and thyroid function. This population has been ignored, and we have actually put this population at greater risk by instituting policies such as fluoridation.
My name's Vivian Howard. I'm the Professor of Bioimaging here at the University of Ulster in Coleraine, and I'm a medical pathologist and toxicologist, and my research over the past 20 or 30 years has involved looking at the effect of toxic substances on development in the fetus and the infant. This is generally recognized as an area or a period of life when you're especially vulnerable to certain effects. I guess the thing that got me interested in fluoride in the first place was the very, very low levels that you find in human breast milk, 5 parts per billion. What that tells me is that throughout evolution we've built up a special mechanism for keeping fluoride away from the developing infant. Nature has devised a system for keeping fluoride away from the infant, and we're circumventing that by putting fluoride into drinking water. And I think there are consequences. So the question is, why is it that nature has devolved a system which specifically keeps fluoride away from the infant? And the answer is, it's a developmental toxin. And in particular, it's a neurotoxin. I mean, there's lots of epidemiological evidence now that, for example, it might affect the intelligence of the child, coming out of China, and that's been reviewed by the National Academy of Sciences. They say that you can't be absolutely certain about it, but there's quite a strong indication, and we need further research. There have also been other studies which show that it might be able to affect hormonal systems, endocrine systems, in particular thyroid levels. And that can have an effect on IQ in developing children. If you take the normal range of thyroid in the mother, then there's a difference in intelligence of the offspring between the mothers who have the upper limit of normal range and the lower limit of the normal range of thyroid hormone. So, you know, we're tinkering with quite a sensitive system. So the evidence is out there for us to have to say that we've got to be very careful. And my opinion is that there isn't a satisfactory one-dose-fits-all solution through treating a whole population via tap water. There are going to be some members of that population which will be more at disadvantage than others, and they will obviously include the fetus and the infant, but at the other end of life, people who've got marginal kidney function will be more susceptible. And therefore, I don't think on a precautionary basis that we should be continuing the fluoridation of drinking water supplies. If governments don't have ways of making sure that people in the areas that are fluoridated who are susceptible, like bottle-fed babies, are actually stopped from being exposed in that way, then they have no right, really, to be using a mass medication like this. In my opinion, under the precautionary principle, we should not be fluoridating drinking water.